is that a person who is distracted has a psychological makeup of being mad or deranged. It means stuff that used to make sense don't make sense no more. Am I talking about? That's why people can give up ministries, because when you become distracted, a ministry that used to mean everything to you, all of a sudden don't mean nothing. You can be on the ushers for 20 years and get distracted and walk away from it. Can I help you more? Folks that used to mean something. When you get distracted, people who are valuable to you, all of a sudden, they lose their value. When you get distracted, stuff you used to do like praising becomes obsolete. Because believers lose the ability to believe that God is still in charge. But I checked the throne this morning. When I kneeled down to pray, I looked at the throne to see was he still sitting. Because if he was up walking and pacing, I would have known that he had lost control. But when I looked up this morning, he was still sitting on the throne. And he told me, don't worry, whatever you're going through is just what I'm using to get you to. Come on, shake somebody's hand. Tell them whatever you're going through, it's just what I'm using to get you to. Oftentimes what makes us deranged is grief or anxiety. If you spot these things in your life, you can tell you are distracted. I gotta close, I gotta hurry up, but there are 4 distractions. There are 4 distractions that Paul talks about in this letter. The first one he says is that to the Philippian people is don't be distracted by personal problems. Secondly, he says don't be distracted by personal passions. And then thirdly, don't be distracted by people's perception. And finally, don't be distracted by persistent problems. The word persistent means stuff that stayed longer than it should. Things that you feel like you ought to be over now, but that problem's still living with you. That problem's still calling you every once in a while. That problem's still talking about you, nagging you. That problem is still within an eye view. Paul says that we're going to lose our ability to be distracted. This way I got to tell you. He says there are basically 3 things you got to do. The first thing, if you're taking notes, is in order to get past distractions, you must embrace Christ being magnified. I don't want to leave that too soon. Listen to what I'm saying. In order to get past a distraction, you got to embrace Christ being magnified. Paul here was in jail. Paul had some who had defected from him. Paul was going through, and he looked at the Philippian church, and false prophets had come on the inside. You do know when you're going through, somebody gonna show up to steal whatever you have. Do I have a witness here? Folks like to catch you when you're down. Can I just break here to tell you the characteristics of a sheep? I remember it said the Lord shall prepare a table before me in the presence of the enemy. Can I help you out with that? If I can help you out, just wave your hand. See, we look at that to think that he was talking about the enemy on the outside of the flock. But there is a characteristic of a sheep. What the shepherd would do, because what sheep would do is if they found a bleeding sheep, sheep would gnaw at the wound of a bleeding sheep. So what the shepherd did, he would take his coat and put it at the head. He would then take his rod and put it on the end. He would then take his staff and put it on the other side. And he would stand at the head of the table, so that while that sheep is bleeding, that those who wanted to gnaw at the womb of the sheep could not get to the sheep. Now, can I help you here? Dr. Gaston has been a good shepherd for somebody. You were bleeding, and somebody tried to get to your wound, but he stood and built a table around you. In the presence of your enemies, he stood with you. I'm looking for some people that don't mind telling somebody, he stood with me. He understood my going through. He talked to me about my going through. He prayed for me when I was going through. He built a table in the presence of my enemies. I'm trying to do as much as I can. Listen, you got to learn how to embrace. Tell somebody, you got to get this now, because this is going to get you free. You got to learn how to embrace Christ being magnified. I want to talk to you there. Listen, that's what he says. Paul says, you got to embrace Christ being magnified. And Dr. Gaston, that messed with my mind. Because the problem is what magnifies Christ doesn't always magnify us at first. It messed with me deep, because I look back at a few years ago. In the midst of a schedule, cancer showed up. And here I was preaching the gospel, living for the Lord. He done put me on schedule all over the country. And I leave teaching and go back to my doctor. And the doctor sets me down and says, Pastor, you have cancer. My question was, why, God? And I'm making it short. How many here have asked why? Listen what he told me. He said, you got to understand, Russell. Cancer been chasing you since you were 10 years old. But I held it back until your faith got strong enough to deal with the cancer. Because your cancer is not unto death, but rather unto testimony. And I'm looking for 10 people in here that'll high five somebody and tell them, God held my stuff back until my faith got to the point that I could go through my stuff, because it wasn't unto my destruction, but it was unto my testimony. Oh, God, tell me somebody here ought to come out in the aisle and shout right now, because you getting ready to get your blessing. What you showed up in here with, you ain't gonna leave with, because God told me that what you're going through, it was just unto your testimony. You got a long day. Let me tell you how this works. And you can get this series off my sermon there, but let me tell you, free. Let me tell you how it works. See, what Paul says is you got to understand, which means you got to know. I got to do a little bit. He says you got to understand. You got to know. Yes. You got to be aware of the fact that what happened to me, it happened for the furtherance of the gospel. I said, wait a minute, Paul, wait a minute. You went to jail. You persecuted the church. Because he was Saul then, but he was still the same man. All this stuff happened, and you telling me that somehow it worked for the furtherance of the gospel. But listen to this. He says, having fallen out. Well, when you break that word down, that phrase down, having fallen out, what it means literally is that the stuff that came in my life left my life but showed back up. Anybody got some of your life, you keep going through it? Look like every time you get rid of it and a blessing show up, it come right back. Anybody got some folks in your life, they wait till you get blessed and they call your phone. If they hear about your blessing, they'll show me. I come to tell you